So, welcome to the Fat of the Land. I'm Nicolette Hahn-Nyman. I'll be the moderator today. And I'm incredibly happy to be part of this conference, which truly has been a very unique gathering, unlike any that I've ever attended. And I hope and I believe it will actually mark a turning point in the public conversation in the United States about food, because there have been some really important ideas presented here, and it will continue to be over the next couple of days, that are really not part of the conversation that much right now in the American, sort of good food movement. And actually, this fats issue, to me, is kind of a perfect example of the type of issue that I think is not getting adequate treatment in the public conversation and in the advocacy work that's happening in the United States today. And we're not going to be able to delve deeply into every type of fat. So what we decided to do was to delve deeply into one particular type of vegetable oil fat that is replacing animal fats in a lot of contexts, and that's palm oil.
So in the early 1990s, the palm oil industry was largely localized. It was a small industry in Southeast Asia. And it's now grown over 43%. It's a $50 billion crop. About 75% of what is grown in Southeast Asia is exported to Europe, Africa, and to some extent, the United States. Palm oil is grown in plantations in what used to be large areas of rainforest. So these rainforests are cleared, and what happens in the course of that is that carbon is released. So Indonesia, where much of the palm oil is grown, about 66% of our palm oil comes from Indonesia. Indonesia is now the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind the United States and China. So when we added up all of these costs for the entire palm oil industry, it turns out, not surprisingly, they are quite significant. They add up to about $43 billion in societal costs from these environmental impacts that these communities are now paying for. So if you put it in other words, if the industry had to pay for the costs, these environmental costs of production, the price of palm oil would almost double. Now, are they as large as other commodities? Yes and no. We look at beef, for example. The commodity cost of beef is about $35,000 per ton. So, of course, beef production has much higher external costs, and the cost of beef production is about 1.5 times its market value. So palm oil has significant costs, especially in relation to its production value.
We're using the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil Standards. Although people say it's not high enough or whatever, for us, it's a way to coalesce government, civil society, industry, indigenous communities around a set of principles and criteria to just get on track. This is the poster child for palm oil devastation, and it's both sensationalized as well as true. Their habitats are being devastated every day as we speak. And I'd like to say that, these guys and restoring their respectable place within the web is intimately linked to whether that other guy survives. And this little girl and what she eats and her health and her future, I would say, is also connected.
Vegetable oils were invented in the early 1900s. They're an industrial product. They use chemical solvents, a multi-step process involving winterization, deodorization. It's a giant plant that you need to make a vegetable oil. They don't occur naturally in nature. And they weren't really much tested before they came into our food supply. When they did those big clinical trials, this is another one called the LA Veteran Study. They consistently found that the people who were on the high polyunsaturated vegetable oil diets had higher rates of cancer. When you eat any carbohydrate, it's converted in your body into glucose. Even those healthier whole grains become glucose in your bloodstream. Glucose triggers the release of insulin from your pancreas. Insulin is like the king of all hormones for making you fat. You cannot get fat, you cannot depose fat without the presence of insulin. Insulin plus glucose. So this is a theory. It's a growing hypothesis with a growing amount of clinical trial data behind it. So potentially, the negative consequences of switching to a vegetable oil-based high carbohydrate diet are all of the major chronic diseases that are now so burdensome to our society. I mean, I can't even put a number on this. So why are animal fats needed? Animal fats are needed to eat a higher fat diet. It turns out the low-fat, high-carb diet is not tolerable for most people. That's why half of American is overweight, obese, or pre-diabetic or diabetic. If you're to eat a higher fat diet, where do fats occur naturally? Natural fats are in animal foods. So returning to animal foods, bringing those into your diet are the natural whole food way to have a higher fat diet. Just returning to the palm oil story, I wanted to show you this. Palm oil, so palm oil was kind of low here. Why did palm oil get so high? Anything that sits on a shelf, any manufactured food needs a hard fat. Right? You can't use vegetable oils in their oil form. It's greasy, it doesn't have any shelf life, it's not long lasting, it goes rancid, so you need to have a hard fat. Back here, we were using lard and tallow as our hard fats. McDonald's French fries used to be fried in lard. When we got rid of saturated fats, because we thought they were unhealthy, we had to move to, what did we all move to? We moved to partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which is hardened oils. That's what Crisco is. That makes them stable and it makes them hard. It mimics a hard fat. But then we found out that those contain trans fats. This is when we discovered they contain trans fats. Boom, that goes down. We can't use partially hydrogenated vegetable oils anymore. So what goes up? Palm oil. Palm oil is a plant-based saturated fat. So we had to increase palm oil. There's nothing else for the entire manufacturing industry to use, because we can't go back to butter and lard and tallow. Those things are have such a taboo around them. But if we could, if we found that those fats are no longer bad for health, that would, I think, take the pressure off of palm oil.
The saturated fat content in a grass-fed animal that's actually finished off grass is significantly different in terms of its individual profile of saturated fatty acids. And those individuals, the C18, the C16, the C18 is neutral where the low-density lipoproteins are concerned, and as we get down into the shorter chain saturates, that's where we see the reductionist science show that there's an elevation in what we would classify as bad cholesterol. We put our cattle into a feedlot and we feed them grain, and we do that because it's very efficient. I mean, it produces a lot of beef very quickly, and I think we've seen that there's some environmental costs there that are really problematic. It may look efficient on, in the retail store, but from an ecological perspective, we've got some serious issues there. So what happens to the animals when we put them in the feedlot? Well, within 3 months on grain, we drop the nutritional value of that animal significantly. Because of the results that we had with our own beef study and with the meta-analysis that we conducted, we got into the dairy thing and we started looking at the milk issues. And we saw the same exact phenomenon in milk. The full-fat milk is really where you have the luscious goodness. That's where the omega-3 is located. That's where your CLA, your TVA, your vitamin A, your vitamin E.
If you go back before the 1920s in the UK, there was just about no coronary heart disease. And that's quite staggering when you consider what happened during the 20th century. In fact, I've got data from Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. They did not have a single case of heart attack to deal with between 1920 and 1926, when they had 2 cases. And by 1930, they were getting about 4 cases a year, and it increased exponentially up to the 1970s, when they were getting over 500 cases a year. And that happened during a time when saturated fat consumption in the diet stayed almost flat. And in fact, it was slightly falling. But what was happening is that during the 19th century, sugar consumption in the UK increased tenfold. Not by 10%, but tenfold. It went up from £10 per head in 1830 to £100 per head by 1900. And ironically, just as we've been told to avoid animal fats, it was about this time that we started to see the inclusion of hydrogenated vegetable oils in the diet. Plants produce oils more efficiently than animals. You actually get a lot more oil out of crops growing on an acre of land than you do out of keeping animals there. And at the moment, there actually are not enough animal fats around to replace the vegetable oils. Now, what I think we have to do first of all is recognise the point that's been made today that we've actually been seriously misled by what I believe to be a conspiracy between the sugar industry and the vegetable oils industry. But then we need to carry out a comprehensive, and I mean comprehensive and unbiased, analysis of the true cost accounts of producing food in different ways. We could then come up with an understanding of which systems are really and truly the most effective, the most efficient, and the most efficient cost way forward for society as a whole. Final thing I want to just make, whether we want the future to look like this as the way we produce our oils. This is how soybean oil is produced in South America and corn oil produced in that way, or whether we want a pasture-based way of producing our oils in future. Thank you.
Thank you.